This is Cyprus, a Mediterranean island with over 300 days of sunshine and crystal clear beaches. To many, it's a peaceful, idyllic spot. However, what if I told you that alongside this, the country has a much darker story to tell? You see, if you zoom out of Cyprus, you'd see this line through it. Not literally, of course, but it exists. It wasn't drawn by geography, but by history. It's known as the Green Line, and it splits Cyprus into two, making it the last divided country in Europe. So how did a place this small and this beautiful end up split in half? Well, to understand that, you need to understand something about Cyprus that has defined its entire existence: location. Just look at where it's situated when you zoom out a bit. It's right at the crossroads between Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. So for any empire wanting to control Mediterranean trade, project military power, or guard against rivals, Cyprus was essential. And so, for most of recorded history, Cyprus never actually belonged to itself. It belonged to whoever controlled the Eastern Mediterranean. Obviously, there was a native population, and even a potential kingdom in the form of Alaşia during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages. But it's what came next that shaped the island permanently. Greek settlers began arriving around 3,200 years ago. They established city kingdoms across the island, and over the following centuries, Greek culture replaced the native Cypriot one. By around 1000 BCE, Cyprus was culturally Greek, and it would remain that way through everything that followed. Naturally, empires come and go, and as a result, Cyprus changed ownership plenty of times. From the Assyrians to the Egyptians to even the Venetians, so many kingdoms had at one point absorbed it. Though for over 1,500 years, from the times of Alexander the Great through the Byzantines, Cyprus was governed by Greek-speaking empires. But eventually, some real change of influence started to happen, when in 1571, the Ottoman Empire conquered the island from Venice. They brought a significant Turkish Muslim population to the land, but they didn't try to assimilate themselves or even the Greeks. Rather, they governed through the millet system, a structure where religious communities managed their own affairs. The head of the Church of Cyprus was given authority over the Greek population and acted as a mediator between them and the Ottoman authorities. So the Greek Orthodox Cypriots had their own schools, courts, and leadership, while the Turkish Muslim Cypriots had theirs. For over 300 years, the two communities lived side by side on the same small island. They shared villages in some places, traded, but they didn't merge. Obviously, this wasn't peaceful at times, and there was bloodshed at times for sure, but that's basically how it went. Eventually though, with the Greek War of Independence in 1821, everything changed. Some Greek Cypriots left to fight alongside mainland Greeks. The Ottomans responded by executing 486 prominent of them, including the Archbishop. It was meant to crush any ideas about joining Greece, but instead it planted them. By the early 20th century, Enosis, the ideology of union with Greece, had become the dominant political dream among Greek Cypriots. Things took another radical turn when, in the aftermath of the Russo-Turkish War, Cyprus was leased to the British Empire, which took over its administration in 1878. The British wanted a strategic base in the Eastern Mediterranean to protect their colonial trade routes through the Suez Canal and counter Russian expansion, while the Ottomans wanted guarantees that Britain would defend them against possible Russian aggression. Following the outbreak of the First World War and the decision of the Ottoman Empire to join the war on the side of the Central Powers, the British Empire formally annexed Cyprus in 1914. In 1923, under the Treaty of Lausanne, the nascent Turkish Republic relinquished any claim to Cyprus, and in 1925 it was declared a British Crown colony. At the time, the Greek population was hopeful that British ownership would lead to Enosis, but of course that wasn't to happen, and their relationship naturally began to sour. It started in 1928, when Greek Cypriots refused to take part in the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the British occupation of Cyprus, and continued to evolve. The British passed reforms aimed at curbing Greek nationalist influence in schools. They kept raising taxes, and they tightly controlled it more strictly than they did other colonial possessions at the time, like Malta or Egypt. Eventually, this led to the 1931 Cyprus Revolt. when in October, 5,000 Greek Cypriots rallied in the streets of Nicosia while chanting pro-Enosis slogans. They burned down the governor's house and removed British flags from public offices, before the British cracked down on the protesters, arresting over 2,600 of them and killing 7. In response, the British government banned political parties and abolished the representative government as Governor Ronald Storrs declared martial law. This ultimately all led to the formation of EOKA, or National Organization of Cypriot Fighters, in 1955, created with the military aim of uniting the island with Greece, seeing it as a natural right. What came next was a 4-year period known as the Cyprus Emergency, where the EOKA waged total insurgency against British rule, targeting police stations, military infrastructure, and colonial officials, as Britain responded by deploying thousands of troops to the island. By the end of it, 371 British soldiers died, along with over 100 Greek Cypriots. Meanwhile, initially, the Turkish Cypriots supported the continuation of British rule since it was preventing Enosis, but they began to be caught in the militant crossfire between EOKA and the British, and took their own stance in response to this. There was even a paramilitary Turkish resistance organization created too. However, upon realizing the fact that the Turkish Cypriot population was only 20% of the islanders made annexation unfeasible, the national policy was changed to favor partition. It was known as Taksim in response to Enosis. With the island on the verge of a civil war, representatives of Greece and Turkey, the so-called motherlands, opened discussions of the Cyprus issue in December 1958. What emerged were the Zurich and London agreements, where instead of unification with Greece or partition by Turkey, it had become independent. So on August 16, 1960, the Republic of Cyprus was born. In the newly made constitution, political power was divided along ethnic lines, with government posts and public offices allocated by fixed communal quotas. The Turkish Cypriot minority was guaranteed 30% of parliament and the civil service, and the Turkish Cypriot vice president was granted an absolute veto over key areas like defense, foreign policy, and internal security. Separately, in different agreements, Britain also retained sovereignty over 256 square kilometers of land, which became the Dikelia Sovereign Base Area to the northeast of Larnaca and the Akrotiri Sovereign Base Area to the southwest of Limassol. But here's the thing, that's not all there is to the story. In fact, it's just beginning, because what came next is what really left us with the Cyprus we see today. Let me explain. Although independence was, quote, achieved, it wasn't necessarily wanted by either side. In fact, it was more out of compromise than anything close to national unity. At the time, the island had a population of 573,000, of which 77% were Greeks, 18% were Turks, and the remaining 5% were just others. The Greek Cypriot leadership believed that the rights given to Turkish Cypriots under the constitution were too extensive and designed the Akritas Plan, which was aimed at reforming the constitution in favor of Greek Cypriots, including taking things to violent means if the Turkish Cypriots tried protesting it. Eventually, everything erupted in what is known as Bloody Christmas, when on the night of December 20th, 1963, Greek Cypriot police killed 2 Turkish Cypriots. Within hours, violence spread across the city. Cars full of armed Greek Cypriots roamed through the streets of Nicosia and fired indiscriminately, and Turkish Cypriots fired at patrolling police cars. The events of the Bloody Christmas abruptly brought about the end of the power-sharing arrangement in the government of Cyprus, leaving the police and civil service to become de facto Greek Cypriot organizations. By the end of everything, 364 Turkish Cypriots and 174 Greek Cypriots were killed. Around 25,000 Turkish Cypriots from 104 different villages abandoned their homes. The displacement amounted to a quarter of the Turkish Cypriot population, who mainly began living in enclaves. This is where we start seeing the divide we see today. Because in the very last few days of 1963, British Major General Peter Young sat down at a map of Cyprus, and after hours of high-level meetings, drew a line through it with a green Chinograph pencil, dividing Nicosia and its surroundings in 2. It was known as the Green Line, but this line, as we'll see, was only temporary, because 10 years later everything fell apart. on July 15, 1974, the Greek military dictatorship under Dimitrios Ioannidis carried out a coup in Cyprus to unite the island with Greece. Obviously, there's a lot of context for how this happened, but to explain it simply, the coup, where Greek officers led the Cypriot National Guard to capture the presidential palace in Nicosia, ousted President Makarios III and replaced him with pro-Enosis nationalist Nikos Samson. Whether Turkish Cypriots suffered as a direct result of the coup remains controversial, but Samson was seen as an untrustworthy figure due to his pro-Enosis policies and brutal role against Turkish Cypriots in 1963 as part of the EOKA execution team. So just 5 days later, Turkey invaded Cyprus, invoking its rights to protect the republic under the Treaty of Guarantee. International pressure eventually led to a ceasefire, but by then 37% of the island had been taken over by the Turks, and 180,000 Greek Cypriots had been evicted from their homes in the north. At the same time, around 50,000 Turkish Cypriots were displaced to the north and settled in the properties of the displaced Greek Cypriots in a sort of population exchange. The land that the Turkish military captured became the basis for the new Green Line, a heavily guarded UN buffer zone that now made up 4% of the island, stretching from Paralimni in the east to Kato Pyrgos in the west, where a separate section surrounds Kokina. The boundaries don't correspond to ethnic lands or anything, they're just ceasefire lines similar to the Korean DMZ. The Turkish army had to stop invading at a certain point, and they hadn't occupied the entire land. So they just established their own government. The land up north became the Turkish Federated State of Cyprus, with the leadership hoping that the Greek Cypriots would treat them as equals and proceed to proclaim their own federated state. But it never happened. So after 8 years of failed talks, they declared independence under the name of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, otherwise known as Northern Cyprus. This was all, of course, entirely viewed as illegal occupation under various international laws. But it didn't matter. It was done. The Turkish army even built their own barrier on the zone's northern side, consisting mainly of barbed wire fencing, concrete wall segments, watchtowers, anti-tank ditches, and minefields. It's about as long as the Green Line, or now UN buffer zone, which is also 180 kilometers across Cyprus. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, Nicosia remains the last divided capital in Europe, while Cyprus remains the last divided country. Since then, there's been countless talks in regards to the Cyprus problem, which basically is finding a long-term solution to where they're at right now. Whether it be the idea of reunification, a two-state solution, or being partitioned by Greece and Turkey, these mediated discussions have gone on for decades with barely anything really to show for it. The good news, though, is that while the Cyprus problem is difficult to solve, it's relatively easy to manage. Extremist violence is virtually non-existent now. The conflict's last deaths came in 1996, and since April 2003, both sides have allowed free crossings of the buffer zone, effectively ending a nearly 30-year ban on movement between the north and south. Turkish Cypriots from the north come to work in the richer south, or shop for brands that are unwilling to do business in the unrecognized north, while Greek Cypriots from the south head north for inexpensive dining, gas, and even medical care. It has created an interesting dynamic though. Going from south to north in Nicosia feels like entering a different country, and not just because of the 2 passport controls. People often say the north looks as if it's been frozen in time since the 1970s, as Turkey is the only country to recognize it. On the Greek Cypriot side, Ledra Street is a typical commercial thoroughfare. There's H&M's, Starbucks, and McDonald's. By contrast, a bazaar-like atmosphere fills the north. Street stalls, less formal shops, and restaurants are what the activity is all about. And that's the strange reality of Cyprus today. The island isn't at war, but it isn't whole either. The violence has stopped, the crossings are open, and daily life moves on. Yet the line remains. They may have learned to manage the division, but what's to be seen is if they'll ever be able to end it. Thank you for watching.